Though I never imagined sharing my life this way, here I am. I'm Lucy, 30F, and my life started to spin in directions I never would have seen. Over anything still strange, my family kicked me out. For what? My sister Emma, 34F, the golden child, could not handle it since I dared to accomplish without their support. Let me take you back to how it all started. Growing up in a tiny suburban town close to Seattle, my family's inclination was obvious from the start. I'm here to share my tale, rant, and maybe even find some direction from you all. The pride of the family came from Emma, my older sister. She was outstanding in all spheres: sports, academics, and social events. She was vibrant and always seemed to have everything together. There would be a celebratory supper should she receive an A. If I did, it would just be, "That's nice, Lucy," and the discussion would turn back to Emma. Don't get me wrong, Emma was remarkable. She attended a famous institution. My parents paid for tuition, a nice apartment, and even her spring break travels to Europe. Me too. Spending my time coding in my room, I was the scholarly, silent one. Having made it into a top-notch computer science school, I had to work part-time and apply for loans to help pay for university. Fast forward a few years, and I'm working as a project manager at a computer business. Though I graduated with honors, my accomplishments never seemed to fit. While the compensation is good, I wanted more. To advance in my profession, I wanted my MBA. The challenge is well into 6 digits. Tuition was shockingly costly. But I thought, hey, my parents paid for Emma's education, maybe they'll help me out a bit. One evening at a family dinner, I plucked up the bravery to mention it. Having spent an hour praising Emma's recent promotion, I then set out my strategy. I described the benefits of the curriculum and how it will advance my career. Then I asked whether they could co-sign a loan, not even pay for it, only co-sign. Their response? Pure incredulity. It was as though I had asked them to market the house. Mom stated, "We've already invested so much in Emma's education, and now we need to think about our future." Dad added, noting ideas to grow the family restaurant. Not even as co-signers could they afford to aid me. I was devastated. Desperate, I turned to my Aunt Margaret. They had gone all out for Emma, but suddenly they had to be prudent. Margaret is the older sister of my dad and a quite outstanding neurosurgeon. Although there has always been conflict between her and my parents, she has always been nice to me. Dad felt eclipsed by her success and objected to her. Growing up, I would overhear his sour criticisms about how she displayed her wealth. Reaching out to her was difficult, but I had few choices. When I described my circumstances, she immediately volunteered to assist. "Of course, Lucy," she continued. "Why didn't you come to me sooner? I have always believed in you." Her generosity was a lifeline. We decided to keep everything under wraps in order to prevent family strife. I considered myself to be safe. My tuition was paid for, and I was set to start my MBA path. But nothing stays secret for very long. Emma somehow found out. Perhaps she listened in on a chat or snooped through my emails, but she lost it when she found Aunt Margaret helping me. One evening, I arrived home after work, eager to tell her about my forthcoming MBA orientation. But I sensed something was amiss as soon as I went in. The house was quiet. The air was strained. My stuff was piled into boxes in the main room. Sitting on the couch, my parents wore expressions of both disappointment and wrath. Emma stood off to the side, grinning smugly, arms crossed like she had won some sick game. Dad tossed a bundle of papers at me. "Explain this?" He started barking. I grabbed the papers, perplexed. These were printouts of phony emails meant for Aunt Margaret and me. The emails claimed I had sold family secrets, recipes, supplier information, and financial records in exchange for her financing my tuition. It was an outrageous charge. I hardly have access to most of that material either. Still, the emails appeared convincing, perfectly polished. Emma had gone to tremendous efforts to produce them, presenting me as a traitor. "This is not genuine," you stammered. "Emma has to have created these. But my parents rejected me. You turned on us." Mom shed tears. "We counted on you. You trusted her," I shot back, looking at Emma. They didn't care. Emma was their golden girl from always. Her word was gospel. I begged them to change their minds and see the truth. They urged me to pack and head out. I sought to convey the MBA, Aunt Margaret's encouragement, and personal significance of it. Emma merely stood there, arrogant as always, while my parents shunned me. "You've always been jealous of me," she sneered as I filled my car with the little things I could grab. I drove away, humiliated and distraught, not sure where to go. Aunt Margaret was the only comfort. She greeted me into her house without thinking twice. Now, here I am, set to begin my MBA, trying to negotiate the mental debris of losing my family. Reddit, I'm looking for guidance here. I fight to show Emma lied? Alternatively, do I carry on and bid them farewell permanently? I appreciate you hanging with me. I stayed with Aunt Margaret trying to sort through things after being booted out. Though it was difficult, her constant support was a lifeline. I can recall showing up at her house, a muddle of tears and resentment. She merely hugged me and said, "You'll get through this." She didn't probe. It dawned on me that you are stronger than you believe that night as I laid in the guest room surrounded by quickly packed boxes. I had no family, no house, at least not in the conventional sense. I was stunned by the treachery of my sister and my parents' unquestioning allegiance to her. One thing was obvious, though. I couldn't let this break me. The next few weeks passed in a haze. I hardly had time to sort through what had happened between deciding on my MBA enrollment and adjusting to living at Aunt Margaret's. Margaret truly was amazing. She told me one evening over dinner, "Focus on the future," and offered more than just a roof over my head. She gave me support and room to heal. Your parents chose what they wanted. Now it's time for yours. She was right, of course. I had to give all of my attention to the MBA program as it was just beginning. Still, the emotional weight hung about. Starting the MBA program was both exhilarating and terrible. I couldn't stop revisiting that night in my mind. Emma's smug look, my parents' harsh accusations, the sense of being erased from my own family. I entered the lecture classroom on the first day feeling like a fraud. I persisted in waiting for someone to call me out and tell me I didn't belong. Instead, I discovered a group of determined, aspirational people who shared my nervousness and eagerness. Nobody else did. Late-night study sessions and group projects linked us, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I was part of something. The schoolwork was rigorous but also exciting. I threw myself into seminars on finance, strategy, and leadership, absorbing every bit of information. It was more than simply the degree. It was about demonstrating to myself that I was capable, that I could transcend all my family had thrown at me. Aunt Margaret turned out to be my best supporter. We would get down for dinner and catch up every week. She would probe my classes and provide guidance based on her own experiences. "You're doing amazing," she would say. "Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise." Her encouragement stood in sharp contrast to the quiet from Emma and my parents. Not one email, call, or text message. First, it hurt. But I began to experience an odd sort of relief as the weeks stretched into months. Their absence was liberating. Something changed about 6 months into the program. I stopped identifying myself as the girl who had been ignored. One night, after giving a particularly demanding presentation, I sat in my small studio desk at Aunt Margaret's and let it sink in. I was prospering. Emma couldn't take this away from me. The rejection of my parents could not destroy my diligence. I felt like I was in charge of my own life for the first time in years, but as life sometimes does, just when I believed I would have passed the worst of it, a curveball struck. It was a calm Friday night, and I was reviewing notes for an impending test when my phone chimed. I first discounted it, thinking it was another group chat alert. But then I noticed Emma's name on the screen. My gut started to knot. For what reason was she phoning? After months of quiet, what could she possibly want? Against my better judgment, I grabbed. "Lucy," she whispered, her voice oddly gentle. "I have to talk to you." I was on alert right away. "Emma, what do you want for?" A long silence preceded her response. She answered at last, "It's about the restaurant. It's under duress. Big danger." I had no idea whether to yell or chuckle. She was coming to me for aid after all she had done. After writing emails, getting me kicked out, and standing by as our parents disowned me. With a firm voice, I answered, "You've got to be kidding me." "After what you did, you think I worry about the restaurant?" Her voice cracking, she begged, "Please, Lucy." I know I made a mistake. I am aware of hurting you. But I had no idea who else to ask. The boldness of it all made me mute. She then went on to detail how the restaurant's growth had gone disastrous. Mom and Dad are falling apart, she remarked. Loans had been taken out, bills were mounting, and they were close to bankruptcy. They are clueless on what to do. I felt, you might be able to help, with your MBA and all. Her comments really hit me like a gut check. Almost too much irony was involved. I didn't respond that night. The family that had kicked me out was now looking to the so-called black sheep, me, to save them. Rather, I told her I needed time to consider. After hanging up, I remained there for what felt like hours, struggling with a whirl of feelings. I wanted to shut the door on them, let them collapse under the weight of their own choices. Not for Emma necessarily, but for the parents who had constantly failed to understand my value. Another, much smaller, quieter part of me felt something like sympathy. I haven't decided what to do yet. As usual, Aunt Margaret has been my voice of reason. She said, "Think carefully. Don't sacrifice yourself for people who wouldn't do the same for you." She's correct, of course. Still, it's not that straightforward. Reddit? What would you do? Do I walk away and concentrate on the life I have created without them, or do I aid them and run the danger of revisiting old scars? Emma's call made me feel as though I was caught between two worlds, the one I had been thrown out of and the life I had so painstakingly created. "Don't sacrifice yourself for people who wouldn't do the same for you," Aunt Margaret said. Her words lingered with me. Honestly, I'm still trying to make sense of it all. But when it comes to family, no matter how poisonous they have been, the night Emma called, I found myself pacing in my room, repeatedly going over everything again. After all she had done, her gall to reach out like that was almost ridiculous. But then there was something else under my wrath. Guilt. I hated that I felt, but it was there. This represented my family. These were the people I had grown up with, the ones I had spent years trying to win over, even though it was abundantly evident I would never measure up. Desperate enough to come to me, the one they had thrown away, they were now falling apart. Aunt Margaret and I discussed it over breakfast the next day. She gently placed down her coffee cup and listened quietly as I ranted about Emma's daring and my parents' hypocrisy. "Lucy," she said, "you owe them nothing at all." "I know," glancing down at my plate. "You have worked hard to create a life for yourself and have every right to defend it. But it is difficult to just discount them." Margaret groaned. "Even now, they are my family. Family transcends blood. It is about something more. It is about who shows up for you and who stands by your side when it counts. They have never done that for you." Her inquiry struck me like a gut-reversing blow. As it happened, they hadn't, not in the manner that counted. Later that day, I decided to investigate the matter further with the restaurant, since I couldn't get rid of the impression that leaving totally may make me just as merciless as they had been to me. I wanted the whole picture if I were about to decide. Emma sounded delighted that I hadn't instantly hung up on her. I called Emma again, keeping my tone as neutral as possible, and said, "Tell me everything." She described the way the eatery had descended into anarchy. Convinced it would treble their income, my parents had borrowed enormous amounts to support an expansion. Emma revealed that they had cut corners to stay afloat, skipping taxes, breaking health rules, and signing dubious supplier deals. But poor planning, mismanagement, and bad luck had left them drowning in debt. "They're talking about bankruptcy," Emma said, her voice shaking. "And legal ramifications could follow." I permitted her words to sink in. The circumstances were far worse than I had thought. This was an ever-present risk of financial and legal catastrophe, not only a failed company. "Why are you visiting me?" I eventually asked. Emma was silent for a time before she answered, "Because you're the only one who can help." Emma and Mom and Dad made it really apparent I'm not part of this family anymore. "Lucy, you're clever. Though I didn't want to admit it, you have always been wiser than I am. And include your MBA. Her admission surprised me, since you might really be able to repair this." Emma had looked down on me, handled me as though I was beneath her, for as long as I could remember. Hearing her appreciate my skills felt strange, but I wasn't about to let her control me. I'll think about it, I responded, and disconnected before she could say anything else. That evening, I sat with Aunt Margaret and told her everything. She listened without interrupting, as always, her look serene and deliberate. When I finished, she sat back in her chair. "It sounds like they're asking you to enter a mess they created," she added. I agreed and said, "And if you do, it will be about saving them from the consequences of their actions rather than only about correcting their mistakes." Knowing this, but something inside me feels like perhaps this presents an opportunity for proof. Margaret smiled sadly to show them what they missed when she pushed me aside. "Lucy, you have no need to prove anything to them. You already showed it to everyone who counts as well as to yourself. Although helping them could temporarily improve your mood, at what expense?" Long after she retired to bed, her remarks stuck with me. The next morning, I resolved some soul-searching. Thinking about all that had happened over the past few years, I strolled slowly across the city. I considered the night my parents threw me, the hurt of their treachery, and the quiet strength I had discovered in beginning over. I considered Aunt Margaret, who had been more of a parent than my own ever were. And I considered the life I was creating, the MBA, my job, my independence. By the time I returned home, I knew what I had to do. That evening, I gave Emma another call. "I have decided," I said. The other end of the line stopped. "And thus," my voice steady, I continued, "I can't help you. Not with this in mind." Emma started to object, but I stopped her off. "I have worked too hard to create a life for myself, and I am not going to risk it for people who have never been there for me. You have to work this out for yourself, and perhaps consider how you have handled me as you work on it. Not easy, Reddit." I hung up before she could reply, as I'm done being the backup plan. Still conflicted in part is me. Deep inside, though, I know I made the correct decision. Now I am concentrating on what counts: my MBA, my work, and the people who have supported me through it all. "Sometimes helping others involves sacrificing oneself," Aunt Margaret said, and I thought saying no to Emma would be the toughest part, but I was wrong. I thought. As it happens, my family wasn't ready to accept no as the response. Let me tell you what happened next. After I hung up on Emma, I felt a weird mix of remorse and relief. My choice hit hard, and I'm still trying to sort things. Saying no felt like recovering a bit of me, but it also felt weighty, like closing the door on something I could never get back. 2 days later, my phone buzzed when I was in a group study session. I tried to ignore the sense that this wasn't finished by focusing on the MBA program and homework. At first, I turned away from it, but it kept buzzing. My chest clenched when I at last checked and found a series of missed calls from my folks. Not since they kicked me out, not in more than 3 years had they contacted me. And suddenly they wanted to chat now. I froze. That evening, I returned home to find Aunt Margaret waiting for me in the living room, her arms crossed and her face tense with anxiety. "Your parents called me," she murmured. "What? For what?" "Lucy, they are desperate. They shared with me the restaurant and how you turned them down. They wanted me to persuade you to assist." My chest started to swell with wrath. "Obviously they did. They believe they can control me going via you now." Margaret sighed. "I turned them down. I made it plain that I back you, not them." The next day, I discovered just how far they were ready to travel. I was in the middle of a strategy class when my assistant buzzed me. "Lucy, there are 2 people here asking to see you." My heart fell. "They say they are your parents." I excused myself from the group and hurried to the foyer, my pulse beating. I couldn't believe they had turned up at my business. I hardly could identify them when I first saw them. My dad seemed older, his face pulled and his shoulders dropped. Although my mother looked as if she hadn't slept in weeks and her hair was completely gray, their looks didn't soften me. If anything, it stoked my resentment. Not wishing to have this debate in my office, I led them to a neighboring coffee shop. Dad continued, "We need to talk," his voice gruff and low. "We have no right to invade your space like this." We settled down, and for a minute none of us spoke. Mom broke the stillness at last. The tension was stifling. "Lucy, we apologize. We should not have thrown you out." Her voice was faltering and tears welled up in her eyes. "We should have helped you." but instead of being moved, I felt numb. "We need your help," Dad said. "The restaurant looks less than what we would have wanted. Legal problems, grave ones, abound here. The only one who can save us is you." I looked at them, hardly sure I could understand what I was hearing. They were not only seeking assistance, they were asking me to tidy the disaster they had created, a mess that would cost them everything. I inhaled deeply, attempting to keep my voice steady. "Let me straightforwardly clarify this. You kicked me out based on lies, neglected me for years, and now you expect me to save you from your illegal activity? Do you hear yourself at all?" Mom begged with her eyes as she reached across the table. "We know we are not deserving of your assistance. But Lucy, our family is unique. Does that not imply anything? And family there it was once more." I shook my head. That word they love to toss around when it fit them. Family is more than simply a word. It is about showing up for one another and helping each other. For me, you have never done that. Dad's face stiffened. "After all we have done for you, you are just going to go away?" Though there was no humor in it, I laughed uncontrollably. "For me, everything you have done? You mean you would ignore me all my life? Emma is preferred at all turns, kicking me out without even paying my side any thought?" Mom started crying openly here, but I had little pity for the victim. "I'm sorry you're in this situation," I muttered, standing up after spending too long bearing their neglect to feel bad for them now. "But your own decisions have these results." Dad's cheeks flushed with wrath as I refused to give up all I had worked for to save you. "We are going to lose everything. Is that what you wish for?" Looking him in the eye, I continued, "What I want is for you to at last own your deeds, and for once I am choosing me." I left that coffee shop feeling lighter than I had in years. I had stood up to my parents and marked a line they were unable to cross for the first time, but I understood this was not done here. The state of the restaurant was a legal and financial catastrophe simply waiting to blow up, not only a family issue now. That evening, I decided even if I wanted to wash my hands of it and avoid the possible fallout, I told the relevant authorities all I knew about the illegal operations of the eatery. I lay it all out: tax evasion, health code infractions, dubious supplier transactions. It was not a simple decision. Though I knew it would wreck Emma and my parents, I also felt it was the proper thing to do. Others could suffer if they were not held responsible. The immediate consequences were evident. The restaurant closed for a thorough investigation, and my family's legal problems became really real rather quickly. Emma screamed that I had destroyed everything when she called, and my parents left a series of frantic voicemails, alternately begging and threatening. Aunt Margaret was my rock through it all. She reminded me that despite not feeling good, I was acting morally. "Sometimes doing the right thing means making difficult decisions," she remarked. "But Lucy, you are looking after yourself, and that's what counts." After deciding to expose my family's illicit activities, I prepared myself for the storm I knew would follow. First in a long time, I felt free. The degree of intensity and unrelenting nature of it surprised me. Let me walk you through what happened next. The authorities moved faster than I could have imagined. It feels weird, as if I am living through the last disintegration of everything that used to define me. The eatery closed for a thorough examination some days ago. In our little town, the story traveled fast, and soon people began to speculate. Knowing it would be a quagmire of rumors, I avoided social media completely. Then the phone calls arrived. Emma called first, her voice tinged with poison. "Lucy, you have destroyed everything," she yelled. "Do you know what you have done to us?" Though my heart was racing, I stayed cool. "Emma," I told her the truth. "You are fantastic. You all made decisions. Now you have to cope with the results. Don't you believe you are far more suited than we are right now, with your nice MBA and large employment?" Her comments stung more than I wanted to admit, but I didn't let her see it. "You still are the same selfish, jealous little sister." This has nothing to do with Emma, not personally. It speaks of responsibility. She hung up on me, and I stayed there for a long time staring at my phone. Maybe it's time you all learned what that means. Though it made the suffering less intolerable, I felt I had done the right thing. My parents began phoning the next day. The messages were first desperate, pleading with me to undo her words, to fix this mess. before it was too late. "Lucy, please," my mother pleaded in one voicemail, her voice quivering with emotion. "We are going to lose everything. Can you simply invert it? Our family is here." But when it became evident I wouldn't go, their tone altered. "You think you're so righteous," my dad spat in another message. "You have wrecked your own family." After that, I blocked their numbers. "I hope you're happy." Although it was not a simple choice, I could not keep allowing their toxicity to permeate my life. While I had to guard my personal calm, the inquiry of the restaurant revealed far more than I had anticipated. Tax avoidance, fake documentation, unpaid salaries to staff. It was a disaster, and the consequences were severe. Emma was not spared too. My parents were slapped with fines they could not afford, and there was the possibility of criminal prosecution. She personally participated in numerous dubious activities as the manager. A part of me felt validated when I learned through the grapevine she had lost her job at the restaurant and was looking for employment. Although they had always regarded me like the black sheep, the outcast, now they were paying for their crimes while I was flourishing. Still, witnessing their life fall apart brought little delight. Aunt Margaret was my support through it all. She reminded me every day that I wasn't responsible for their downfall, they were. "You gave them more grace than they ever gave you," she observed one evening as we shared a bottle of wine. "Still, grace has limitations. Lucy, they have never developed responsibility." Though there were still times of uncertainty, her words provided me strength now. Late at night, I would lie awake thinking whether I might have done things differently. Could I have served them without sacrificing myself in the process? Was there a way to mend the harm without ruining our meager remaining relationship? Then I would recall the years of neglect, the ongoing favoritism, and the way they had tossed me out without thinking twice. This was about a lifetime of being treated like I didn't matter, not only about the restaurant. Eventually, the establishment closed under investigation. For my parents, who had devoted their lives to that company, it marked the end of a chapter. Emma had moved back in with them, her confidence destroyed, while I heard through mutual friends that they were selling their house to pay off debt and trying to negotiate lowered penalties. The fall from grace must have been terrible for someone who had always been the golden child, loved and praised for everything she did. Still, I felt no need to reach out. Now they were dealing with the results after making decisions. As for me, things were going better than I could have hoped. My life was finally on course, and I wasn't about to veer off for individuals who had never really been there for me. Just as my MBA degree was almost finished, I received a job offer from a prominent consulting company. Aunt Margaret and I celebrated the news with a lovely meal, toasting to fresh starts and new beginnings. It felt as though all the hard effort, late hours, and sacrifices were finally paying off. "You've come so far, Lucy," she murmured, pride gleaming in her eyes. Her encouragement meant everything to me. Never allow someone to make you feel as though you deserve less. When my own turned their backs on me, she had been the family I much needed. Now, as I stood on the brink of a fresh chapter, I felt more appreciative than ever for her consistent presence in my life. Still, I couldn't help but worry if I would ever find peace with Emma and my parents. Could we ever put the shattered bits of our love back together? Alternatively, was this the last chapter of a tale marked always with suffering and treachery? I have opted to center myself for now, my future, my work, and the people really close to me. Should my family wish to mend a relationship, it will have to be on my terms. This is most likely my last post. I have spent too long attempting to win their affection and approval. Though it's been a whirlwind trip with everything that has transpired, I feel like I am at last finding ground. Writing this has helped me process a lot. Hopefully, sharing my story will help someone else going through something similar. Let's start where I left off. The effects of the restaurant's closing kept washing across my family. Selling the house where I had grown up, my parents were obliged to downsize to a little rented house. Hearing about it, this place Emma had been living in, filled with so much affection for her and so little for me, was weird. Emma seemed to have reached rock bottom. She lost her social rank in addition to her employment. The same folks who had always complimented her accomplishments started to murmur about her failure. Though I expected learning of her death would satisfy me, it did not. If anything, it merely served to highlight how poisonous our family relationships had been for both of us. I had no communication with them throughout this period, although Aunt Margaret would periodically forward information. Her cautious avoidance of pushing me allowed me to determine when, or if, I wanted to reconnect. Meanwhile, my life was unfolding in ways I never would have anticipated. Surrounded by friends who had evolved from classmates, I graduated from my MBA degree at the top of my class. Walking over that stage knowing how far I had come was strange. Shortly after, I began working for a consulting company. Though fast-paced and demanding, I performed best in the surroundings. I felt exactly where I was supposed to be, for the first time in my life. Aunt Margaret and I celebrated with a weekend trip to Napa Valley. My colleagues valued my work, and I no longer felt as though I had to show my worth to anyone. Under the starlight with a glass of wine in hand, I came to see just how different my life had become from the evening my parents kicked me out. I was no more that insecure, terrified girl. Though I felt confident, independent, and at last at peace with myself, a part of me kept returning to my family even as I rebuilt this new life. Still struggling? Did they wish they had handled me differently? Did anyone even give me any thought at all? I found my answer late one evening while finishing up a report for work. My phone chimed. Though I couldn't identify the number, something compelled me to respond. "Lucy?" I froze. It was the voice of my mother, gentle and reluctant. "Mom?" Long silence before her speaking once more. I wanted to say I was sorry, generally for everything, for the way you were treated, for not having your belief. Her comment struck me like a tidal wave, not the parents you deserved. I had dreamed of hearing those words for years, but now that they were here, I wasn't sure how to react. "I don't know if you can forgive us," she said, her voice breaking. "But I just needed you to know how sorry I am." I inhaled deeply, attempting to calm myself. "It means a lot that you're saying finally," I said. "It does not, however, remove the suffering you brought about for me. You turned your back on me, hence I had to start from nothing and construct my life. And I cannot simply ignore that." She sniffed on the other end of the call. "I comprehend. Only, I long for you, Lucy. We all do." Not sure what to respond to that. Part of me wanted to get in touch to let her have an opportunity to right things. But another side of me was afraid of letting more suffering into me. "I need time," I replied at last. "I'm not ready to jump right back into where we left off. It will take more than an apology if you truly want to atone. I'll do whatever it takes," she said. "I just want to fix this." I sat in quiet for a long period following our hang-up. Though it was a step, that call was not a fix. It was a beginning, probably. I discussed it with Aunt Margaret, who, as always, gave wise counsel. "You are free to establish limits," she advised. "You owe them nothing at all. On your terms, though, if you wish to give them an opportunity. Not theirs." Her comments cleared things for me. I was not the same person I'd been when they banished me. Over the next few weeks, I started emailing my mother. I had evolved, and if they wanted to be in my life, they had to meet me where I was, not drag me back into the past. Though it was slow and careful, it seemed like improvement. Though I kept my distance, she appeared really sorry. Emma or my dad never got back to me, and I was good with that. Right now, it was sufficient to move one step at a time. I'm not sure what my relationship with my family has in store. Perhaps we will be able to rebuild, or perhaps we will go our different ways permanently. Either way, I know I'll be good. Right now, I'm here in my newly acquired apartment, a home I worked hard to afford. If there is one thing I have learned from all of this, it is that family is defined by love, respect, and support rather than blood. I am surrounded by friends who support me, colleagues who respect me, and pride in the life I have made. And sometimes the family you select is the one that really counts. To anyone out there battling poisonous family dynamics, I want you to know you deserve to be treated with love and respect. You are entitled to guard your peace and create limits. Most essential, though, you have the will to create a good life wherever you live.